Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Anu Sood, and I'm the Director of Marketing at CaseWare RCM and today's moderator. I hope you're doing well, and I thank you for joining today's session. So today's webinar is on suspicious activity reporting. I would say that this is a perennial favorite of our audience, and we have addressed this topic in the past, but we decided to bring in a new speaker to speak about this particular area, because I think it's worthwhile to have different perspectives on this issue, especially those who have a different industry experience or just different perspectives in general. So a little bit about our presenter today. So Sarah Beth Felix is a founder and owner of Palmera Consulting, a specialized AML CTF advisory firm. And she provides AML system validations, remediation, SME roles, product rollout, and risk assessments. She brings 18 years of anti-financial crime experience and has worked with financial institutions of all types, including banks, credit unions, FinTechs, trade finance institutions, MSBs, broker-dealers, and mortgage companies. She is recognized in the industry for her ability to navigate and operationalize global AML CTF regulations. And as a formal AML officer, she provides actionable, sustainable, and effective solutions through firsthand knowledge of how systems and data impact daily compliance efforts. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand over the presentation to Sarah Beth, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Hey, thank you so much. All right, so this is our last of 3 in our community bank series. I know the last couple sessions we had non-community banks, which is great. So if you are a larger bank and a lot of the things that I'm talking about you may be like, oh yeah, well, we already do this, and it's probably because you're in a larger institution. So, but I hope at least some of the things that we'll go over today can help impact you regardless of what type of institution or what size of institution that you're at. So here's just an overview of what we're going to look at. We got a whole bunch to get through. I know the last couple webinars that I did, I kind of went over time, and then we took a whole bunch of questions. So I tried to make this one a little bit more on time today. So we're going to start out with a poll. There's a couple polls throughout the day. I think the majority of them are in the beginning of the presentation. I just want to get a feel for what everyone's landscape is in terms of their everyday. So our first poll here, let's see. What steps does your institution take to measure effectiveness within the suspicious activity monitoring program? Whether that's the suspicious activity reporting program or the monitoring program, whatever title that you have, just want to get a feel for what, if anything, that either your institution or you, if you are the AML officer or the MLRO, what are you doing to test that effectiveness, or do you just kind of wait for audits? So I'll give you seconds here. Seeing some really good numbers. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So Sarah Beth, while people are answering, how, in your experience, how often are people looking at these numbers or ratios?
I think for a lot of community banks, they're not looking at it often enough. They kind of wait for an independent audit or maybe their quarterly board report to play with some numbers to see what they're doing. But the majority of these answers here are saying all of the above, which is great. Awesome. I haven't, seen that out in the field with a lot of institutions that are under, 10 billion in assets. So, but these are great, things that people, if you are one of the other users that are answering either none of the above or only 1, 2, or 3, then I would encourage you to incorporate the first 3 all into a single report to measure your effectiveness.
Very good.
All right. Okay. So we can close that. Okay. So let's move on. Effectiveness defined. This is kind of, my jam. I think a lot of us are waiting, regardless of whether or not your institution or you are based in the U.S., a lot of us are waiting for the powers that be, whether they be supranational powers or your country level FIU to define what effectiveness looks like. And like any law or guidance or advisory that comes from national FIU or from a global supranational body, they get really formal, and they kind of struggle to make it operationalized for those who then have to take their definition of effectiveness and do something with it in their everyday. So as a former Latin student, I still really enjoy etymology. And I mean, it's been a long time, like 25, almost 30 years since I was in Latin. So, but one of the things that helps me when I'm looking at these kind of, everyday terms, but what does that mean in my particular anti-money laundering program environment, I like to go to the root of the word. So efficere is the root word to work out or accomplish. And then out of that, we got the Latin word of effectivus, which is productive. So both of those mean serving to execute the intended purposes. And I think for me, that kind of points the AML practitioners in a way where we have to both accomplish the goal, but the goal is the goal we're waiting to have defined, but that goal really is to produce useful SARs and useful STRs for our law enforcement partners. That is the bottom line of everything that we're doing, right? When we are doing ultimate beneficial ownership collection and verification, and we're doing CDD, and we're doing cash reporting, we're doing all of these daily tasks that seem kind of nominal in and of themselves, they all have data or information that can help you make their decisions when it comes to our ultimate goal, which is to produce suspicious activity reports, suspicious transaction reports for our law enforcement partners. So I'm hoping as we go along here, especially in the US, we have an advance notice for proposed rulemaking where they've asked people to give their feedback on what an effective AML CTF program looks like. And if you are a US institution and you're on this, I would encourage you to take the time. You have until this next Monday, so just a few days to respond. They have 11 questions. You don't have to respond to all 11, but it doesn't have to be formal. We submitted like an 8-pager, I think, that covered all 11 questions, but we were very frank in what our feedback was. So I would encourage you, if you are an AML officer and you're like, this is what effectiveness means to me in this area, I would encourage you to submit those comments. So while we're kind of like waiting for all this, Wolfsburg did outline in December of 19 what effectiveness looks like to them and their member banks, essentially. So they had this statement that came out, and they said that they believe that significant time and resources are spent on these areas that don't really fall into any of these three things that they've outlined here, but they've become really expectations. And I think if you are an AML officer, that translates into a checklist audit, right? There's these standard checklist exams, checklist expectations of what your program looks like, but they really don't serve any, they don't serve the purpose of moving the ball further down the field, right? So somebody comes in and they write you up because you transpose a date of birth on a CTR. That doesn't really speak to your effectiveness of how you use and if you use that information in order to see the customer clearly, to see if there's any suspicious activity there. So they published this statement. It's, I think 2.5 pages. But really wanted to encourage institutions to take a risk-based approach to these practices that really don't really speak to the effectiveness of your program as a whole. So while this slide really doesn't give us any big, directions going forward, the point of this is for you to take ownership of your suspicious activity monitoring program, to make sure that you define for yourself and for your management what effectiveness is to you and how you will measure it going forward. So in order to do that, you have to be able to outline what your sources of suspicious activity are. And this is not an all-encompassing list, but these are the main critical elements to detecting suspicious activity. Some of these will be U.S.-centric, like 314A and B. Those are information sharing avenues that U.S. institutions have, not only other U.S. institutions that are registered, but also federal law enforcement agencies. A lot of countries don't have that particular channel or have both channels available, but the rest of us really have all of these things at our fingertips. You have the court requests or subpoenas and national security letters, you have the alerts, you have the CDDs, you have the high-risk customer reviews. All of those things should be contributing something to your global suspicious activity monitoring program as a whole. For typologies, you are going to have basically two different areas that you would have the typologies extracted from. So these would be advisories and guidance from your country level FIU or even from the FATF when they publish things on human trafficking, when they publish things on COVID-19 schemes. Those are advisories and guidance that you should be able to take and apply it to your system in a risk-based approach. And then prior cases in SARS. So out of those prior cases in SARS, a lot of times, a lot of community institutions, they'll file SARS kind of in a vacuum. They don't take these SARS or STRs, for some, complex, let's say, title company type of activity where there's lots of layering going on. There's some cache activity. They don't take that and use it as like a soft typology to then go at their other title companies to see, wait, is this going on in other title companies that I'm just not aware of it because it's not triggering our alerts due, to the volume not being as high. So I would encourage you, if you're not looking at your SARS and your STRs in a way to kind of retrofit to see if you have any other customers that are not previously known to you that may have similar activity to some of the SARS and STRs, I would encourage you to start implementing that. All right, we have another poll. Just really quickly, I'm just curious about this, but does your independent review or audit focus mainly on testing effectiveness for the suspicious activity monitoring program? So gave you 5 options here. If they typically test for timeliness and accuracy, they typically test just the written program to ensure all the elements are present, that they test the whether your alert dispositions are researched and closed out or escalated within your program defined period of time, right? If you have a system that produces everything on a monthly basis, do you give yourself 45 days and then they're going in and saying, hey, this alert was not dispositioned until the 49th day? Are they looking at those things, all of them or none of them? Let's see what we have here.
Yeah, so while people are answering, and maybe you're going to cover this, quick answer, why should people look at the effectiveness of their suspicious activity monitoring program?
Well, because I think for me, that's where the spirit of the law compliance really comes into play. A lot of times we all, regardless of country, we have written guidance, we have written regulations that clearly spell out what we're supposed to be doing. And that to me is letter of the law, right? We look at that and it says, do this or don't do this, or if you do this, then apply the risk-based approach. That's letter of the law. Those things are really easy to audit and test for. I look at something and I compare it to what you have. I look at something and I compare it to what you have. Spirit of the law is really where a lot of institutions get into trouble because they're so busy complying with the letter of the law, because that's what they're audited to, that they forget that the spirit of the law, the purpose of why we're doing any of this is to make sure that we have the most effective approach to detecting and reporting suspicious activity. And that is very difficult to test because it's not a checklist, right? It's not, do you have this written in your policy? Check, right? It is a nuanced, complex situation that varies by institution. So it's hard to have a template for that. So that for me is why it's important to test for it, but that is also why it's difficult to test for it in that manner. So a lot of these 1, 2, and 3 are more of the checklist, right? These are what institution, I mean, these are what your standard auditors are checking for, but they're looking again for the timeliness or to make sure the program says this because the regulation says this. These are all checklists approach that, yes, while there is some benefit to that, that should be, 20% of an audit process of the suspicious activity monitoring area. So, yeah. So for the majority of people answered all of the above, which is good. If the thing for those, 90-ish attendees that selected number 4, I would encourage you that if that is all that you're getting from your independent audit or your internal audit folks, or if that's the bulk of what you're getting when they're auditing or testing you, I would encourage you to push them further. There's written guidance in every country FIU, including the US, including the FFIEC AML exam manual, that clearly states that they're supposed to be looking at the effectiveness of the program. So effective means producing something. So while your program may be ticked and tied to, do you address this? Do you have an investigatory process that's outlined in your written program? Check, 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 check. If that's all they're looking at, the majority of what they're looking at, I would encourage you to send it back, send that audit back and say, hey, audit me. Your job is to protect me and find the things before bank examiners do. So can you test the effectiveness of what I'm doing as a whole to make sure I don't have any gaps or I don't have a typology that I'm not aware of? All right, so common signs of ineffectiveness. These are things for me, this is kind of like my initial approach. I am with any institution. I am looking at what does their monitoring program look like? And these are high level, I call them indicators. They are indicators of ineffectiveness. So when I look at SAR numbers, do they have a low number of new SARs? Meaning, are the majority of the SARs filed per month just recurring or continuing SARs? Is that 80 or 90% of their SAR number? Is it just what we already knew about 90 to 120 days ago? Or are the majority of those SARs filed per month on new activity? Are there any SARs or STRs related to human and drug trafficking? And this is something I think for community banks, they really struggle with, because I think the mentality in community institutions is, well, that doesn't happen here. And if it does, they're probably going to a large bank. It's like, well, no, if you think like a criminal, right? If you put on that mindset of a criminal and think, if I was engaged in illicit activity and I wanted to move money through the system, I'm most likely going to go to a small institution because I know they don't have the people or the technology to really find me. And I know that most community banks think that their community bank or that their community is, above board. So, I mean, that's why we have professional money launderers. There's guidance out there from the FATF talking about professional money launderers. So another sign of ineffective monitoring program would be none or a low referred internally SARs or STRs. So that would be, you aren't getting any referred SARs or STRs from your high-risk customer monitoring team. This is something we talked about the week before last when we did the high-risk customer monitoring program. Out of that effort, out of your high-risk customer team, there should be some type of referral for a SAR or an STR out of that effort. And if you're not getting those, that's a sign of an ineffective monitoring program. And it's not that, if you have any one of these, boom, you are ineffective. But these are those indicators that at glance that you can do really quickly, kind of test it, kind of a litmus test to go, do I have any possibilities of ineffective monitoring programs here? For ineffective executive reporting, I know a lot of people don't test for this, but this is something for me that I like to look at, especially in remediation, right? So these are institutions that have been criticized, typically in an informal manner, so it's not public. And they've been criticized for kind of nebulous issues, right? Ineffective suspicious activity monitoring program, right? They get dinged for that. And it's like, okay, well, let's read through the lines of what the examiner's issues are. And it usually just kind of extrapolates out from there. And one of the things, always 10 out of 10, would be ineffective executive reporting. So one of the signs that I look for, that I ask the AML officer about, is, do you get pushback on asking for a single staff member? And even though you've made your case, you've shown the increase in alerts, the increase in cases, the increase in high risk types, the huge increase in SAR production, and you've made your case, you've said, hey, I just need one more person, not a high level person, I just need one more person, and it's a request that really falls on deaf ears. That for me means that either your executive team and your board is not engaged, which is a whole nother issue, or that they're not getting the right information that's beyond the here's my alerts and here's this, here's that. They need the why behind it. So that's one of the things I look for. Also, if your executive team or your board is focused only on key performance indicators, right? They want the anti-money laundering team to fit into the same efficiency box as lending, and the same efficiency box as onboarding, and the same efficiency box as cash management. And that is absolutely impossible. If you force that, you will dilute what you're doing, and therefore you won't be able to get the things that you need in order to have an effective program. So later on, I'm going to give you some ideas about other effective reporting that kind of tells a story a little bit better for when the reporting goes up. Also, a sign of ineffective executive reporting would be if the AML officer really doesn't get any feedback at all from the board. I have a client, community bank, Eastern Seaboard in the US, and there are times where the board members will reach out to the AML officer when it's not board meetings and just say, hey, I was looking through the notes of our last board meeting, and I noticed that your team started filing a lot more than quarters past for human trafficking. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on? And do you have the people systems that you need? That type of feedback from the board really shows that, one, that they are engaged, and two, that they want to know what's going on. It's not just a one-way reporting of the AML officer reporting up to the board, and then it just kind of goes into a vacuum and it's there for the records, and the auditor can come in and say, check, they have reported to the board. But if you're not getting any feedback from the board when you say, we file 50 SARs a month, and then your next quarterly report shows that you've just filed 22. If there's no feedback or question about that, there's issues with effectiveness of executive reporting. So when it comes to the ineffectiveness of SARs and STRs, one of the things I look for is, are you getting any law enforcement inquiries back? If you're getting a low number, if you're getting 1 to 2 a quarter, but filing 200 SARs in a quarter, regardless of whether or not they are new or recurring SARs, that's not a very good ratio, and that could indicate other issues that we'll go over a little bit later. But that's one of the high level things to look at. I mean, if you've never gotten a request back from a law enforcement agency based on a SAR or based on an STR that you filed, that probably tells you that you're either missing suspicious activity that really matters to them, or the way that you're framing it is not effective, and you're not telling the story in a way that makes it clear for the reader who is not a banker. Another sign of it would be years of the recurring SARs. I was just in an institution on the West Coast this summer, and they had 4 years straight of high dollar. I mean, of course, because when you file the recurring SARs, you have to total everything across the 4 years. This number was massive, tens of millions of dollars, and they never got law enforcement feedback. So that was a sign of effectiveness. And they just had this constant, every 90 to 120 days, they would file a SAR every 90. There was no really thinking about it. It was just kind of, let's update the number. Let's make sure there's no other activity. Let's update the number. And when you have that, and there's really been nothing either done to the customer to make them leave or any feedback from law enforcement, that's a sign of an ineffective SAR or STR review process. Also, one of the things I look for is whether or not there's use of the keywords. And these SARs and STRs, regardless of country, really, they all use keyword searches, right? There's no way that a human can go through and review every single SAR or STR. So they use keyword searches, and I'm gonna give you an example of some keywords a little bit later that work to help grab the attention of the readers of the SARs and STRs. All right, last poll. Do your board reports cause any of the following? Sounds like a pharmaceutical drug commercial. Does it cause any of the following? The first one, does it cause your board members to reach out to you regarding additional information? Do they want more updates or more meetings with you? Are they requesting that the AML officer provide input on the expansion of the institution itself or customers or product services? Does it cause you to be invited to less meetings or less interaction, or none of the above? Let's hope it's not number 4. Okay, good. Oh, there's a few number 4.
So, I mean, there's certainly some expectations from the regulator and FATF as well in terms of, the engagement that is expected between the board and the AML compliance officer, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's, in 2014, was it? 2014, I think, FinCEN, which is our FIU here in the U.S., they published a whole culture of compliance. And this is what it should look like. These are the indicators of it. And it was great guidance that came out. But it is very difficult for an AML officer who's already in that, I call it the illusion of authority, right? They don't really have real authority. I mean, they do in paper form, like they have authority, but they don't really, and it's really difficult for that person to take this guidance from FinCEN and say, hey, you are supposed to be talking to me. You are supposed to be doing this and doing that. But yeah, I mean, it is a standard expectation, because at the end of the day, the board of directors and executive management, along with the AML officer, they are responsible for whether or not the institution is effective in finding and reporting suspicious activity. So
I think something that examiners look at all, like how your board interacts with the compliance team.
To be honest, I've never seen it in, and I've done audits in various countries. I've never seen that even be a discussion point with the examiners. I mean, really, I think it should be with the auditors that are really responsible for coming in and testing that, because they have these indicators that they should be looking at. But I do it when I'm helping to fix an institution.
Okay. Interesting.
So yeah, which means that it should be done before an institution needs fixing. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So,
all right.
So Nicole sent the results. Yeah. Let's see what the people say.
It looks like none of the above was the majority of the answer, which is interesting. So if your board reports cause nothing, then that means that it's probably ineffective. If we go back to that last slide here, the ineffective executive reporting. So part of that I find helps is when you can humanize what you're doing. I used to do this when I was an anti-money laundering officer. It's very difficult for a group of humans to sit there and not be curious about what you're doing when you're bringing cases that you've worked, that you've reported, that you've possibly gotten feedback from law enforcement saying, thank you so much for reporting this. This was a human trafficking ring. If you have that type of feedback, again, not not divulging any private information, but give them the specifics of the case, and that engages that human element. Because there's not a heartless person. I think most people, well, there's probably a few heartless people in the world, but I think most people, especially if you're on the board of an institution, they are a grandmother or a grandfather or a brother or a dad or a mom, and they can automatically identify and empathize with a human trafficking ring or with a drug trafficking ring or with elder abuse or with something like that. I mean, so if your reports aren't causing any of these things, then I would challenge you to start trying to humanize it and try to incorporate the following. So on this next slide here, we're going to talk about key performance indicators. I know I have key risk indicators up here too, but for the sake of time, I just wanted to focus on key performance indicators. So what you see on the screen here are, the standard type of reporting I think most institutions provide. And it's one of those things that just kind of goes into the board packet, right? Like the majority of people that respond, they don't get any feedback. So if you can provide it with something like this and a blurb that says, hey, these are all, look at this difference between the new SARS and the recurring SARS. Our new SARS our new SARS are because of these issues. And if you can, I don't know if that's fuzzy for you guys, but the SARS by type here, you got human trafficking SARS, drug trafficking SARS. You're able to give that color table, like the one on the top with the new and the recurring SARS, with a sentence or two that states, hey, the majority of these new SARS are drug trafficking or human trafficking. That's going to grab their attention. They're going to go, wait, what? Why? I thought our community was above par. And you go, no, it's not. So these are the types of things that I think are missing. And again, don't just leave it at these charts here. Put some meat with it. Use the buzzwords that'll capture anybody to go, wait, why all of a sudden are we reporting on human trafficking? We never did that before. What is going on? And then that starts that conversation and that relationship and that ongoing engagement from board and from executive management. So one of the things that you can do as the anti-money laundering officer to test for gaps, and this kind of flows with some of the ineffectiveness things, but these are some of the questions that you can evaluate pretty quickly to see whether or not you have gaps or risk exposure when it comes to the management of your suspicious activity monitoring program as a whole. So one of the first ones is our high-risk customer reviews producing SARS or STRs. And this is something we talked about last webinar and also just a few minutes ago. Our SARS and STRs filed as a result of referrals from other non-AML areas. This is a big thing for me because it really speaks to the effectiveness of other areas that are not specifically in suspicious activity monitoring. So you have to go outside of your area to test how effective your suspicious activity monitoring program is. Our SARS and STRs encompassing all threats that are posed to the institution. This is kind of a hard one to unwind if you don't know what your threats are. And your threat should be based on your FIU. Every FIU, if you are not on FATF's blacklist or their gray list, your country level FIU is required to publish threats and their vulnerabilities. It's also part of what the FATF evaluates. So you can start there. Out of that, you can see which one of my country level threats is related to my institution. Do I have several farming communities? Are my branches and most of my members or customers, are they along national highways or interstates that are known for drug trafficking? We have a lot of massage parlors and nail salons and things like that. that threat would be human trafficking, right? You have key indicators. Do we have a lot of trucking companies, a lot of transportation companies? Those would have, a higher threat for human trafficking. So you need to figure out what those threats are before you ask that third question here. And then, are there repeat SARs and STRs with no law enforcement requests? And this is kind of what we talked a little bit about earlier, but I wanted to give you some next steps. So once you ask that question, are high-risk customer reviews producing SARs and STRs? Go check your reviews for quality. If the answer is no for all of these, then your next step would be to check the reviews. So I know they said CaseWare and Alessa said that they would make the audio portion of last webinar available, and that one we talked about what a high-risk customer review should look like. So if you need that information, and I believe we can give out samples of what a good high-risk customer review should look like for all of the financial institutions that are on the call, if you guys need an example of that. But I would check those if you're not producing any SARs or STRs out of your high-risk customer review process. The next one would be checking training effectiveness. A lot of times this is one of the areas that just gets in the checkbox, right? Did everyone complete their training on time? Check. Did all the new employees complete their training in, the amount of time provided under the policy? Check. These are check mark areas, but if you go just, a few levels deeper, you can see if you're missing anything on the training side, because if you're hardly ever getting any referrals from your branch folks or your lending folks or your wealth management, that is a huge sign that you have an uncovered area of potential suspicious activity, but also that your training is really not effective, because you should be getting something from those areas, and that's a sign of effectiveness when you go, hey, we have an average of 5 to 10 suspicious activity referrals a month from all our different areas. That's a great way to support that statement of effectiveness for your suspicious activity monitoring program. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that all 10 of those referrals are going to end up in SARs. That's not what's being measured here, because you're asking people who aren't anti-money laundering practitioners to make a decision on whether or not something is truly suspicious. And really what you want is you just want to remove that barrier of anonymity that keeps you from knowing what they're seeing. So make sure when you're getting this feedback from your other areas, don't discourage them. Don't go, oh, that's not suspicious activity. No. You want all of the information, then you can decide. So always make sure that there's thank yous and encouragement that that person is thinking that something's wrong, because if you provide negative feedback, you'll close that pipeline in, which obviously has a say in what your effectiveness is. So SARs and STRs. And you have to know your threats first, and then go check your rules. But one of the things I think goes unnoticed, and this has come up several times in remediation projects, what's the mindset of your analysts? A lot of times you may have the right rules. You do have 1 or 2 rules for human trafficking, 1 or 2 rules regarding drug trafficking, 1 rule for threat finance, but your analyst does not have the right mindset. They don't truly understand, what does human trafficking look like? What does it feel like? What is it, what's all these different components of human trafficking? What does it have to look like? And a lot of times analysts don't have that information, especially in community incidents. So I would encourage you not just to check the rules after you've identified your threats, but also make sure that your analysts aren't constantly dispositioning these human trafficking related rules as not suspicious simply because they don't get it. See if you're able to train them to understand what the human trafficking looks like, and make sure that all of your analysts have the same view that you do of suspicious activity, you being the anti-money laundering officer. If you are the anti-money laundering officer by board policy, all of your analysts should be on board with how you view structuring, with how you view human trafficking, et cetera. So there's no discrepancy there. And then Check the quality of the SARs and STRs if you're not getting any law enforcement feedback. We are going to go through that here in just a minute. So SAR and STR tips. So we've got an FCA here, we've got a FinTech STR, and we've got a SAR from the US. Regardless of what country you are in, these elements are absolutely required. You have to tell the story. Don't make it boring. You have to remember that the receivers of this information are not bankers. So make it interesting. Also, deal with your facts, not your feelings, which kind of is difficult because a lot of people are like, oh, well, you need to take a stab at what you think is the suspected underlying activity. That's not a feeling, right? You aren't like, I think that the sky is blue, right? You are saying, based on the facts that I have, based on the known typologies that I have, this is what I believe to be going on. That is not a feeling. That's a presentation of facts with your opinion. Accuracy matters. You have to complete it. Please answer the why. We are going to go over an example here just a minute about where nobody answered the why. There's no why at all. Remember, the why is directly tied to telling the story. If you don't answer the why, then you're not going to tell the story, because the story is wrapped up in the why there. And then always double check your work. That goes without saying. So some of the keywords here that are good to use when you're filling out a SAR or an STR, and there's a lot, and this is something that I can give out to the institutions that need it. It's just a Word document, but these are, a starting list of a lot of keywords. If you're not using any of these keywords when you're filing, that probably means that you're not getting a lot of law enforcement feedback or subpoenas or court requests at all. So let's go through some, I think I have 2 examples to avoid and 1 example to follow. And the reason why I'll tell you in a minute, so let's talk about this first example here. I think most people would look at this and go, yeah, this is not, something's missing here, right? But I think it's important to know exactly what's missing to make sure that your reports don't have these same things that are missing. So in the description area, if you read through that pretty quickly, there's no story, right? There's no hook. There's no real anything here. It's basically a rehash of what happened with words instead of an Excel spreadsheet. They're missing the branch location. They're missing the transaction type. They're missing whether or not there was any branch communication. They're missing some contextual information about the customer, any CDD or onboarding information. They're missing date of birth. They're missing all. And while I know that information is captured in other areas of the FCA form and other forms, it's always good to talk about that all when you're writing the story, right? You need to write the story with all of the information there. The reasons for suspicion. This is where it really should be telling the story. Why is it not typical? Why? There's nothing here other than the fact that they say the withdrawals do not seem typical. But why does it not seem typical? You need contextual information about the customer. You have to have some type of analysis about the wires in and the funds out. Are there other things going on the account that also need to be talked here, whether or not they're suspicious? But maybe you can say, hey, there's other debit card information that's going out, but those appear to be minimal. You need to start filling in those gaps. So I think we all can agree, and I know you guys can't comment, but I think we can all agree that this STR needs a lot of work. So this one here is a little bit different. So a lot of people would probably read this and go, okay, that's a pretty good length. There's a lot of information. We have our social, we have our street address. We've got all of these things. We've got account numbers. And I think most people would look at this and go, yeah, what's wrong with this? I'm not going to read the whole thing for the sake of time, but it's basically an individual and her husband that own a restaurant. They make cash deposits, typically under $200. This time they did 6 different times that they deposited cash throughout different accounts, both her account, her husband's account, and then her 2 minor children account. And then official checks were drawn off of that total. So, which, at the surface level, you're like, this could be interesting. But one of the biggest things that's missing is there's no why. It's not, they're, again, just presenting the facts, which you could have done in an Excel spreadsheet, really, without all of the words. And that's one of those measurements there for me. When I look at something like this, I go, okay, without all these words, I can go make column headings for the date of the withdrawal, the account number, the relationship of the person, and the name. Okay, so why did I have to write all of this? So that's a good check for you and your analyst. If you're looking at something that on the surface appears to be a pretty good SAR narrative, if you can read through that really quickly and go, well, there's really no nuance. I mean, I can fit all of this in an Excel spreadsheet. That's a good indication to you that you're missing a whole bunch of the information. You're missing the why. You're missing what's going on in their business account. Does their business bank with you guys? I would assume so. What kind of information is going on over there? All of the money that was deposited was not all withdrawn. Was there any open source intelligence, any public information gained on the payee, Julia Doe, gained on the payee of the check? They have the same last name, using Google, using a whole bunch of other things. If you have LexisNexis or Reuters or World Check or anything, you can find out a whole bunch of information. Google has a whole bunch of information too. So there's a lot of contextual information that's missing from this. And it doesn't capture you. I mean, it's not something that you would look and go, oh yeah, let's spend some money. Let's get some law enforcement officers to go make a case, to get a subpoena, to get this information. You got to make it really appealing. And I think we would all agree that when we're reading this, it's just kind of a rehash of facts. I think another thing that a lot of people leave out is where the checks were negotiated, or the receiving bank of wires. A lot of times when you read these SAR narratives, you look at kind of a one-sided view and they're like, oh, they took these official checks out, or, oh, they sent these wires. But give all of the information that you have. If checks have cleared, they will have the bank that cleared them. And I think that information is really important because that could be one missing piece to the puzzle for the readers of this suspicious activity report. All right, so let's go to the big example to follow. And this one is broken up into 3 slides because the narrative was long. But as you can see here, the narrative has a clear statement of suspected activity. Now, whether or not the bank is right is immaterial, really. This is a logical assumption, right? We're looking reasonable and very logical that based on the case I'm going to present to you and the fact that I've answered every why and then some, we believe that there's signs of illegal gaming or ghost product and laundering. And you will see that throughout this statement, and you'll also see the case for that. So the big dollar amounts are presented in that first paragraph, right? $9.2 million in checks, $3.5 million in cash. They're talking about the source of the activity, right? Where and how did they first become aware of this? And I think this is something that's missing in a lot of institutions. Especially if you are filing a SAR on activity that happened over a longer period of time, right? It wasn't in the last 2 to 3 months. I would make very clear, and this is for auditors, as an auditor, this also helps auditors because it gives them less things to ding you on. But talk about the source of where you found out about it. So for this one, the BSA officer performed a high-risk customer review on on this place due to an update in their procedures that require the bank to perform in-depth reviews on all high-risk customers. So out of that, they took a new look, an extensive look, a holistic view of the customer. And out of that, they had a new view on what this activity was like. And that's why they're just now filing, even though this activity has been going on for over a year at the institution. This is kind of one of those get out of jail free cards that I think needs to be used more in our narratives, at least in the US. The other thing that is really good about this is that they outlined that the normal activity, that there's activity given the nature of the business, right? This is a convenience store. It has a gas station. And during an on-site review, they saw that part of the business houses the check cashing portion. The other thing that you also want to do, kind of what I said the last time, is you want to talk, at least briefly talk about expected activity and what your thoughts are on that activity. Does it appear legitimate? And it's not included in the filing. But you want to close that gap. Any good investigator is going to think, wait, if they're a convenience store and a gas station, shouldn't they have some type of income for gas? And that's where if you just put that there, spend a few lines and talk about the stuff that you were able to reconcile, that you think it's legitimate, you think there are no questions, then I would put that there. That kind of resolves any questions, any lingering questions in a investigator's mind. So this is the second page of the same SAR. So as we can see here, there was analysis that was performed, right? It wasn't just a rehashing of the information. It wasn't $5,000 deposited and this, amount withdrawn. This is an analysis of it. So they have monthly average total deposited checks exceeded 660,000. However, the withdrawal of cash to fund that check cashing business was only $250,000. So they have $410,000 per month with no offset, meaning if they're actually cashing $660,000 of checks, where are they getting almost $500,000 every month for the supposed check cashing? I'm using air quotes, you just can't see me. And that type of information would get any investigator and go, ooh, yeah, that is a good question. So are they really cashing those extra checks? And I think anytime you use any open source investigatory process, that you should talk about the measures that you exhausted in order to present this information. You Googled various search terms, you were trying to figure out, are they really cashing checks? I mean, if they have this big of a check cashing business, wouldn't there be some rumbling, right? Oh, this guy wouldn't cash my check, or oh, I can't believe his fees are so much. I mean, most people, use Google reviews and TripAdvisors and Yelp reviews to just kind of vent negative stuff. And everyone's very opinionated, and we all have at our fingertips a way to express negative or positive opinions. So it's a reasonable expectation that you would be able to find something about this guy's check cashing business when he's doing millions and millions and millions of dollars. But there was no information. I think that is an interesting thing to also put in there. Also, the cash that's coming out, this is where you can help an investigator, a law enforcement partner, to say, hey, wait, I know that the cash, you're probably going to be distracted by the amount of cash, but let me just tell you that the way in which he withdrew the cash did not appear to be structuring, because 80% of the things, 80% of his withdrawals were single transactions over 10, right? They weren't 9 and a 3 and an 8 and a 6. They were single ones over 10. So not that, again, they can't build the case for structuring. That's on them. But if you're trying to tell the story, you want them to stay focused on the fact that you believe that there's illegal gaming or some ghost product laundering that's going on. So this is the last page of the same SAR. And just seen as a real case, all the facts and the names and everything, except the dollar amounts and the rest of the stuff, everything is real. So this is a real case. So this is one of the closing statements. Due to the discrepancies, due to the large differences, the bank believes, again, that there are signs of illegal gaming or ghost product laundering. The customer does not appear to be cashing checks, but appears to be collecting buy-ins or other payments for a product that doesn't work. And if you're confused about illegal gaming, one of the things you have to remember is that if you have an underground gaming thing going on, and it doesn't have to be gaming, it could be buying services, it could be buying commercial sex. I mean, it could be buying anything that doesn't have an inventory attached to it, essentially. And I could legitimize it by writing a check to Bob, to his convenience store here, saying, this, I want you to cash my check, again, using air quotes. I want you to cash my check for $500. And I put on the memo line, cash check. But really, it's my $500 buy-in to an illegal gaming ring, right? Or it's my $500 of drugs, or my $500 of commercial sex that I'm going to get. So you got to be thinking like that. Just because somebody writes a check doesn't mean that they're actually getting that product or getting that cash back. The SAR didn't go into all that explanation, but that's what's in the mind of the investigator that was writing the SAR. Also, it's very important, especially if you're a U.S. institution, to outline all of your additional supporting docs that are used. Don't just say copies of statements and checks available. Please don't say that, because statements for core banking systems do not reflect accurate dollar amounts, and most times they don't reflect it accurately for the highest risk things that most law enforcement agencies are having issues with, and that's cash and wires. So I would outline clearly that you want, that you have available for them the high-risk customer review, all of the information from the anti-money laundering monitoring system, any CDD that you have, any world check reports, et cetera. So please make sure that you outline all of that information, because then that's covered by Safe Harbor, which means they can reach out to you and ask for that information without having to spend time on a subpoena, and you're covered by Safe Harbor as long as it's listed there and was used in the course of writing the SAR. So pretty quickly, I did not do good managing my time again, but pretty quickly, for quality control to control the quality. I know that's from the Department of Redundancy department, I get it. But the quality control here is vital. And this is something that's in a Word document that I'd be happy to send out to institutions that need some help with how to quality control, how to QC their SARs that are being produced from their analysts, or how to QC your own SARs. This walks you through a sample introductory, or a sample SAR, and what issues or what requirements are in each section of a SAR narrative. And then just to remember, please test your effectiveness of your suspicious activity monitoring program throughout the year. Please don't wait for your auditors or for your bank examiners to come in. There are simple things. I've given you several different tips here where there are quick litmus tests that you can go in and try to detect any ineffectiveness issues. Also, make sure your key performance indicators work for you. And if your board management or your board and executive management are just bound and determined to have you guys fit into that key performance indicator box that the lending department is, that they're functioning in, obviously you need to comply with those requests, but I would really push for an additional report that shows really the quality of what you guys are doing. Also, when you're writing a SAR, please don't just restate the facts. If you can look at a narrative and go, I can fit everything into a few headers in Excel, that means you're missing the why. You gotta have the why. The why tells the story, and it starts with the hook. And then again, please make sure you QC your SARs and STRs. If you've never received a phone call or an email from federal law enforcement or from local law enforcement about any of your SARs and STRs, that is your number one indicator. There are some things that are ineffective and need some help within your suspicious activity monitoring program. All right, done.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. That was a marathon, but I think it's an important topic to cover, and there's just so many details that need to be considered and talked about, and sometimes repeated, because, like you said, we really need to consider our audience, who is going to be reading these. So, Sarah Beth, thank you very much. As always, I really enjoy your perspective, and given the comments from the last two webinars, We know our audience love them. You love the content you provided. So we really thank you for taking the time to be with us and presenting your material. Thank you to Nicole, who's in the background collecting the questions and managing the polls. And thank you to the audience for taking the time to be with us. We really do appreciate your time and your feedback. So we hope you can join us for future events, and we look forward to seeing you soon. So with that, I would like to close up the presentation. I hope you have a great day.